On today's episode of Building the Broncos, Carl and Nick will break down the Denver Broncos' first and second round selections of edge rusher Bradley Chubb and wide receiver Courtland Sutton. This is Building the Broncos.
Welcome to Building the Broncos with your hosts, Nick Kendall and Carl Dumler.
Hello there, Broncos country. It is once again time for another episode of Building the Broncos. I'm your host, Carl Dumler, and with me as always, I have my good friend and co-host, Nick Kendall. Nick, how are you doing, man?
I am doing pretty darn well. The Broncos didn't let me down this weekend. All things looking pretty positive. There was no WTF pick, which it seems to be every year for the Broncos, and the Raiders had a laughable draft class as well. So things are going well in Broncos country here in Iowa City.
Yeah, I saw a little, I don't know what you call it, a graph or a bar chart or whatever you want to call it, of all the grades that teams had received from some of the top prominent draft people. And two of the bottom three teams were the Chiefs and the Raiders.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it felt pretty good. And of course, then the Broncos were top three in most mock drafts. So it was a good feeling to see that. But again, that's in a year that could be completely reversed. So we'll have to see on that. But it's very exciting to see this past weekend and to see how the Broncos actually went about this compared to past drafts. And we'll get into that here in a little bit. But I want to let you know that Building the Broncos focuses all things that pertain to your Denver Broncos as it relates to this past NFL draft and with upcoming offseason and NFL games going ahead. With Nick and myself being draftaholics, we will be bringing you fresh insight and analysis each and every week in every single episode. From scouting reports, player values, scheme and personnel fits, and general draft-related banter. You can follow myself on Twitter at Carl Dumler MHH, as well as follow Nick at Nick Kendall MHH. And be sure to tweet us any questions or opinions you have because we live for talking Bronco football. You can also follow the podcast Twitter account at HuddleUpPod. And make sure you check out ours and our co-writers' written content at milehighhuddle.com, a part of 24/7 Sports and an affiliate of the CBS Sports Digital Network. We know you listeners are as football, draft, and Bronco crazy as we are. So please give us a click and subscribe to us on iTunes as well as Stitcher. And don't forget to share us on Facebook and Twitter. We wouldn't be here today without you listeners. So as a call to action, please go take the time and go to iTunes or Spreaker to rate and subscribe to let your voices be heard on how you enjoy the show. Well, before we really get into each player in this upcoming draft, and then we want to let our listeners know we're going to be making this a 2-episode breakdown. We're going to start with the rounds 1 through 3 to start off with, and then we'll do 4 through 7 on our next episode. But just overall thoughts on this NFL draft.
I thought that the Broncos, again, we talked about it a little bit, but pretty good class. It was interesting. Two of the biggest areas of need going into this draft arguably were the quarterback position, as we touched on here, and the offensive line, which we touched on as well, and relatively were not selected. You know, we had Sam Jones in the 6th round, but he's very not likely to make an early impact for the Broncos. Maybe 1-2 years down the road, there's something there, but kind of like Connor McGovern, he's going to need some development and time. So interesting, but again, the Broncos let the board fall to them, and they took valuable players when they came to them. And I know we were as gung-ho about the quarterback round 1 as possible. You know, this was your chance to do it, but Sam Darnold was gone. There's talk that the Broncos also made a big offer to the Giants to move up to 2 to get one of Darnold or Mayfield. Didn't work out, so they let the board fall to them at 5. We're ready to trade down, thinking the Browns were going to take Bradley Chubb at 4. They took Denzel Ward instead. The Broncos had a deal in place with the Bills. They nixed that and took Bradley Chubb. I'm happy about the Chubb pick. He was probably the only player that wasn't a quarterback I was going to be happy with at 5, or at least, you know, give a grade or something like that. But, you know, it's very interesting. I'm happy to get Chubb. But what his success will be determined not only about how good he does for the Broncos, but the success of Josh Allen and Josh Rosen, those two quarterbacks that John Elway passed on. So we'll see. I personally probably would have gone with Josh Rosen, but there was some talk that his interview with the Broncos did not go super well. There was, nothing like Darius Geis's altercation with the Eagles, but didn't go totally well for the Broncos. And there's some serious concerns about the concussions. So Broncos didn't like him. Broncos didn't like Allen. Heard they didn't even have a first-round grade on Allen. ended up taking Bradley Chubb, and I'm excited about it.
That makes me a little excited that they didn't have a first-round grade on Allen, just because I didn't have a first-round grade on Allen. They saw that same thing, the same problems, the same issues that this guy has all the tools, and they drafted that kind of player. Paxton Lynch, all the tools, but just was as raw as can be. A guy that you're going to need maybe 2-3 years and just the hopes that they're going to become something. And to take the guy that's going to be that for sure immediate impact guy in Bradley Chubb, and a guy that's a leader who's developed. I mean, we're going to talk about this here in just a minute, but when we're looking at past guys that have gone this early as edge rushers, none of them were as far developed as Bradley Chubb when it comes to technique and just ability to understand how to use his hands, his legs, everything to get himself to the quarterback and to stop running backs in the backfield. So the Broncos definitely got themselves a nice player there. And like I said, the Broncos just kind of let the board fall to them. They didn't really until later in the draft do a bunch of trading, and everybody kind of thought they were going to do some major trading. And like you said, they did have trades intact to go up and to go down. But when talent falls to you, you take talent. You can't just hope that other guys are going to fall to you. And John Elway said it. Bradley Chubb wasn't even supposed to be there. They never thought there was a chance that he would get there. And hey, you take the best defensive player that you can, add to that defense, take pressure off Von Miller. Did you see the video of Von Miller after the pick?
Oh, yeah, that dude was probably still celebrating.
Exactly. I mean, he had to be so mad last year with all the double teams he had to fight through and how many times he got so close to making the play, even fighting through a double team to have nothing. Or the times that other guys would have such easy matchups and just couldn't get there. So, yeah, I think he might be the happiest Bronco on the team after that pick, which is kind of crazy that the guy picked at his position is the guy that he's happiest about. But, hey, that's going to be great for the team. But, yeah, overall draft, I really liked it. I really didn't have any big questions until we got to the later rounds. And some guys that I was a little worried about that I just I don't know why you take them. Some other guys that I was really hoping, like Tyrell Crosby, I can't believe he fell as far as he did. I guess there was information that he had a foot injury.
Yep.
That some teams are really worried about. And so, I mean, that's one thing we don't always have that kind of information. So we just look at the talent on the field and say, hey, this guy's very talented on the field. And when teams get those medical red flags, Maurice Hurst is another great example, Raiders draft. And you see those kind of guys fall. So just kind of how the draft goes. It's always crazy to see where players actually end up going compared to where you think they should go.
Yeah, exactly. And one last point before we move on to Bradley Chubb here. People really need to be listening that when it comes to the first round or even their first selection in the NFL draft, they select positions of value. I know this is beating a dead horse here at this point, but let's look at John Elway's first pick of every single draft he's had since he's taken over front office duties. His first pick in 2011, Von Miller, edge rusher. 2012, Derek Wolfe, interior pass rusher. 2013, Sylvester Williams, interior pass rusher. 2014, Bradley Roby, cornerback. 2015, Shane Ray, edge rusher. 2016, Paxton Lynch, quarterback. 2017, Garrett Bowles, offensive tackle. And 2018, Bradley Chubb, edge rusher. So there's something to be said about drafting positions of value in the first round, and it's something that the Broncos believe in. Obviously, given this history of what Elway's done with his first selection for the Broncos, Derek Wolfe not being a first-round pick, but still the first pick that they had in that draft.
Right.
So, I mean, unsurprisingly, the top 5 highest-paid positions in football right now, quarterback, edge rusher, interior defensive lineman, cornerback, and offensive tackle. So the Broncos using that slotted position chart for the rookies and going with positions of value first round, or with the first pick, including Derek Wolfe. So if you're wondering about which way the Broncos are looking to go first round next year, you want to put money down, probably going to be quarterback, offensive tackle, cornerback, or interior offensive line, or interior defensive line, excuse me.
Right. That's one thing you can really count on from Elway. He's definitely going to look at those positions. And I know you and Eric have argued about this a little bit on position value, and you kind of are on opposite ends of that spectrum, but Elway seems to agree with you. And I know you had a radio interview on positional value.
Yeah, we were talking about Quentin Nelson, and I said, you got to use that rookie contract to your full advantage. You can get guards day 2, day 3. So if you're drafting this high and you're going to make Quentin Nelson the highest paid guard in the NFL with guaranteed money, I mean, that's just wasting the advantage of that rookie contract. And instead, the Broncos get Bradley Chubb, who does have, I think, the 12th highest paid guaranteed money for an edge rusher, but he's only the 31st highest paid edge rusher in the NFL. So he's going to be a value for his contract, and that frees up money elsewhere. So, hey, guess what? Jared Veldheer, if he does well this year, you can afford to give him that contract. Or if there's an offensive lineman that you're interested in next year, you have that money because you're paying Chubb at a discounted rate. So there's something to be said with getting guys at high expensive positions on cheap rookie deals.
I love it. Well, let's go ahead and dig into Bradley Chubb here, a defensive end, outside linebacker, just edge player, I guess is the best way to say it, from North Carolina State. And I just want to give a little bit of background into this guy because I always love the stories of how a player got here. There's always those moments that really help to define a player. And I think Bradley Chubb, first off, his family history going back clear to the Civil War with what's Chubbtown? Is that right?
Yep, Chubbtown.
Chubbtown. His family comes from Chubbtown, a town in Georgia that was an all-black community, that was a free community in the South during the Civil War, and they've just had this rich history that has grown from there. And so that's kind of his history. And then he has a dad who played in the NFL. He has a brother that is playing for Detroit right now. And I love the story. I don't know if you read this or not, but Bradley Chubb's brother, he had mini camp with Detroit this past week, but he didn't want to miss his brother's draft. And so he flew from Detroit down to Dallas. And then because he was so worried about traffic, he actually rented a helicopter to fly from the airport to the stadium so that he could be there in time, and made it 30 minutes before the draft started. And he just said that just showed how much my brother loves me and cares for me, that he would spend all that money just to get here to be for my big moment. And he comes from a very tight-knit family. His dad helped coach him when he was in middle school. Has been there, one of his biggest fans throughout the time. His mom has just been he said his mom has been kind of more the dictator of, hey, you're going to do this. You're going to do this right. I read a story that she was making him stay up till 2 a.m. to finish school projects. And I love that. I love hearing that of a family that has really instilled that kind of mentality in him of, you are a hard worker. You're going to work for everything you get. And he did. He had to work for everything he got. In high school, he did not start until his junior year. And then his junior year, he tore his ACL. And because he was a big name, some big schools were recruiting him, but they just stopped. And some people have wondered, why didn't he follow in his dad's footsteps and go to Georgia? Well, Georgia never made him an offer, from what I understand. And so he went to NC State with one of his best friends. Justin Jones is one of his best friends from 8th grade on. And that was a guy that I really liked as well in this past draft. But he went to NC State he was 6'3", 220 pounds. There's so many guys. I know I gave that story on Nathan Shepard, where that's what he went to college as well, like around that kind of size, and then made it clear up to around 300 by the time he graduated. Played linebacker and then moved to defensive line as he got bigger. And he was a 3-star recruit and spent his first year just playing on special teams. A lot of people just didn't know how he was going to develop, but his coach pretty much said, I knew that he was eventually going to be the best player on our team. As a freshman, he knew this kid, there was something special about him, that this kid was going to work his tail off, and just showed his coaches, I'm going to put in the work to become great. And that's exactly what he did. And he proved it every year. He got a little bit better, 5.5 sacks his sophomore year, then 10, and he improved on his run defense as he went along. Just became that player. Like I was telling somebody earlier this week, I was looking at the big board for Mel Kiper, clear back from last August. And do you have any clue where he would have Bradley Chubb ranked?
I don't know.
Okay. He had him, I think, around 24th.
Okay.
And he had 2 pass rushers ahead of him, and Landry and Key.
Yeah. Yep.
And that's understandable. They were both players that were looking very good, looking very promising heading into the next season, had them both as top 10 players. And next thing you know, Bradley Chubb is the one that emerges of the 3 because he stayed consistent in his growth, and he didn't have the off the field issues. He proved that he is an all around player. And we'll get into that more as we go through this, but that's what I love about Bradley Chubb is he just puts in the work. He's that quiet guy that just seems to rise to the top. There's just not many question marks when it comes to his game that you can sit here and say, oh my goodness, this is why he's going to fail. He just checks a lot of boxes that you really want in a player, especially as a top 5 pick when you're investing that much into a player, because a top 5 pick is a very big investment. It might not be financially, but that's a huge investment. You're banking on this guy becoming a star player for you. And so I love this signing. I love this player. I love his background. And I know he has a great group of people behind him that are supporting him. That's important, as we've seen other players that have really struggled because they had family members coming out of the woodworks trying to get money from them and being a distraction, family members fighting over him, all those kind of things, friends that they shouldn't be hanging out with. And I just don't see that with this kid. He has a very, very good supporting cast. And I'm just excited to see what he brings to the Broncos. And so on that note, what do you think Chubb will bring in 2018 versus maybe the last year of his rookie deal?
Well, this season, I don't think he's a perfect fit for the Broncos 3-4 base defense. He can play a 2-point stance, playing that 9 technique, that wide 9, where, you have 3 down linemen in between him, the defensive ends in the 3-4 and the nose tackle. But he can do that. There's a reason he went number 5 overall. He can do it both. He's got speed going forward, and he's got power as well. So at that size, not a lot of people, but some people are saying, oh no, we got another DeMarcus Walker situation. All you have to do is watch DeMarcus Walker versus Louisville compared to Bradley Chubb versus Louisville to see that despite those guys having the same size, Bradley Chubb is a much more explosive, much better edge rusher going forward in the NFL. I love his mentality. He's a guy who's constantly hunting. For edge rushers in today's NFL, there's so many things. There's many different ways to be an effective edge rusher, but there's one thing you need to have. You need to have a relentless motor. You can't take plays off. You got to chase guys down. You got to always be on the hunt. And I don't think there was any player in this class that had the drive, at least on the defensive side of the ball, as Chubb. I mean, that guy is always hunting, chasing guys down from behind, running down quarterbacks. I don't know if you saw, I started doing a Twitter thread on Chubb today, and the first one was a play against Florida State where Blackman, the freshman quarterback for Florida State, takes off from the pocket, and Chubb runs him down 15, 20 yards, catches him from behind, and knocks the ball out, and NC State recovers it on the goal line. So just constant things like that. He never takes a play off. He's got extremely violent hands, and I'm very excited about the pick. I think this year you're gonna see him most likely, obviously the secondary pass rusher behind Von Miller, but I'm guessing he will have the second most snaps behind Von Miller. And I think Shane Ray and Shaq Barrett, if both are still on the team when we open up week 1, I mean, that remains to be seen. There's rumors that the Broncos shopped those guys very heavily. They weren't going to sell them for peanuts, so both are still on the roster. But I wouldn't be surprised if some team calls the Broncos and before week 1, one of those guys is not on the team anymore because of a trade. But Chubb, I expect him to be the second highest percentage of snaps from the edge rusher, and I think he's going to be very effective. And I wouldn't be shocked if he was in the running for Defensive Player of the Year, because he's going to be on the field a lot, and he's going to see some prime opportunities. Not many edge rushers with his talent, his high stature coming in, are going to be given the opportunities that he will have going opposite of Von Miller this upcoming season.
Right. And then you add in, I mean, he's not only just a pass rusher, but his ability against the run.
Yeah.
I know you highlighted in your Twitter feed, sometimes he gets caught jumping inside, kind of like Shane Ray would do. But there's so many times that he can shed his block, make the play in the backfield. He just has great vision. He just sees plays developing. He sees where they're trying to go. And he has that athleticism, even if the play is going away from him, to go make the play. Kind of like you see with Von Miller so many times where you can't run opposite of him and leave him unblocked. That's not going to work for you. He will get your running back before they ever get a chance to make the play. And he's not quite that athletic, but I saw him so many times. I love how strong his hands are. I think it was against Lamar Jackson where he just leaped and just grabbed him by the jersey and pulled him down to the ground. And I saw him do that about 3 or 4 different times. And so you just know that strength in his hands, that once he gets a hold of you, it's hard to get away. He can sometimes get a little out of sorts when he's trying to make a tackle, but when he gets a hold of you, it's done. So again, this is a perfect pick for the Broncos. And one of those guys that just really is that instant impact guy. Like you said, I have no doubt that he's going to be the starter opposite Von Miller. I really don't. He's going to have so many opportunities. And I know, like we talked about earlier, Von Miller is one of the happiest guys because this takes pressure off of him. And it just makes their defense so much better to have a guy like him on the field. And now just looking at what he's going to be, let's say at the end of his rookie year, 5 years from now, 4 or 5 years, I'm hoping for 5 years because that means that they want to keep him around. Unlike what we're hearing with Shane Ray, that he might not get that 5th-year option. But what do you see with how much more growth can he have compared to what he is right now?
Well, there are some weaknesses in his game that I think he can continue to improve on. You touched on something that I don't exactly agree with. You say that he finishes plays a lot. I see him actually get himself – he does the extraordinary thing, and he'll get himself in a situation where he can make a play on a guy that most people would not even come close to. But then you see the running back can kind of skirt away from him, or a quarterback, especially somebody who's strong. I saw it with Blackman. I saw it with Deshaun Kaiser. I saw it with Wimbush of Notre Dame and some of Kelly Bryant as well. I've watched a lot of Bradley Chubb games over the past 48 hours. But there's sometimes he'll get himself in a situation which is, non-human, where he can make a play. Extraordinary. And then he just won't finish it. He'll get his hands on the guy, but he just won't finish it. So that's something I think he can do a better job on. Maybe it's a little bit more of breaking down before the guy gets there so that way he can make the play. Another area I think he can improve a lot on is that sometimes when he gets blocked, he doesn't really have many counters that he can go to. If his primary pass rushing move doesn't win, then sometimes he'll just stay blocked. And that's something that he has the moves to do it. He just has to string them together. So going to the NFL, especially working with a guy like Von Miller, I think he's going to be much more effective there. Because he has that motor, he can still work on guys, bull rush and fight his way through. But if he can string some moves together, get some counters going, he is going to be very effective. Especially, again, everything's better. It's pass rush is synergistic. Everything's better across from Von Miller. Some areas that also I think he can improve on. Sometimes he likes to cheat inside when he's doing his run support. He's very strong and long as an edge setter, but still, if he cheats inside, a guy can, contain him. And then if he loses that, he can lose container on an outside run, which can be an issue sometimes. But a lot of times also that's because the linebacker won't come in and fill the gap properly. So it depends on the assignment. We don't get all the information from watching the tape, but that's just what I've seen. The main thing that I'm not sure what he will ever improve on is his change of direction ability / agility and his flexibility. Now, those things can improve a little bit, but I don't ever think he's going to be a super dynamic, bendy pass rusher on the edge. Von Miller is a guy who can contort his bodies in a way on the edge where you see his knees, his ankles, even his hips in positions that look like you should have some major joint issues, right? Like just stuff that's crazy. And I don't see that so much from Bradley Chubb. He does have a pretty good shoulder dip, but he doesn't flatten and maintain his balance like a Chandler Jones or a Von Miller. And so instead, I think he needs to be more of that power wide edge where you're going to see a guy like Bosa is a prime example where very good motor, very strong hands, tenacious, always getting after the quarterback. And because of those traits, wins enough. He's not a number one overall candidate, in my opinion, because he lacks that ability to bend the corner like the best edge rushers in football. I think he can get better there. I just don't think that's an elite trait of his. But yeah, if he puts it all together, can it improve his counters and everything like that, add a little bit of flexibility, and just be more consistent at setting the edge, which, again, it's a strength of his. I am nitpicking to all nitpicking. You never see him get blown up at the point of attack on the edge like sometimes you'd see Shane Ray do in run defense. And I think he has top 10, top 15 edge rusher potential by the end of this contract, potentially even better. The power's there. I don't want to overhype him or anything, but I think all pro potential, definitely multi-time Pro Bowl potential, and playing across from Von Miller, again, just going to make him that much better. So I'm excited, and you get two edge rushers like that with the Broncos, that makes everybody better. It's honestly a unit-defining thing. It's a team-defining thing. When you get an edge rusher duo like that, it can lead you a long way, and it's honestly going to keep you in every game. It's going to create turnovers. It's going to give you a better field position. It's going to create a mentality. And man, Chubb brings that. And then off the field, I mean, I'm sorry I'm ranting now. I'm really excited about this kid. The more I've read about him, you touched on it here, or you have it in here. He showed up to all his interviews in a suit and tie because, quote, I mean business. And this guy means business on and off the field, a consummate pro. And he likes to get in quarterbacks' heads as well. Have you heard the bit about him where he likes to pull and steal the quarterback's hand towels?
I saw something. I didn't really read on it.
Yeah, so like in the games, the whistle's dead or anything, if he's by the quarterback and that hand towel is there, he's going to snatch it and he's going to steal it just to be a pest, just to annoy the quarterback. And I hope we play the Patriots next year in the playoffs and he steals Tom Brady's hand towel in the cold a few times because I just want to see Tom Brady crying. Phillip Rivers too, he's going to be crying as well. So I love it. I'm very excited about the pick, and I think it's probably the best first-round pick the Broncos have had since Von Miller.
One of the things that I read on him that I really loved was I was listening to an interview with his coach there at NC State, and they were asking him, what was it about him that you just loved? And they said, even as a senior, between drills, he was the guy that made it there first. He was running everywhere. He was setting the tone for how everybody else was expected to be. I mean, this guy's a star. He's getting ready to be a first-round pick, and his coaches are going, we didn't even expect this from him. We would try to get some time off for him, and he didn't want time off. He wanted to keep going, and we're just like, we want to rest you. We want to give other guys opportunities. We know what you are. But he has that drive to be great, and that's something that is so important for every athlete that comes into the NFL is usually a pretty darn good athlete. Yes, some are better athletes than others, but it's that drive that really separates the good from the great. And right now, I don't have that worry with Bradley Chubb that he's going to put in the work to be great. And I think that's an underrated thing. We're going to talk about this with pretty much every pick, but he was a captain of the team. There's so much leadership and character that was brought in with this draft. And Elway hinted at it. I was listening to an interview with him. He said last year when everything was falling apart, we didn't really have those voices that stood up and helped us to get out of the funk, that really, dug in and just said, let's grind, let's do this. He said, we didn't have that in the locker room. He said, we needed it. I know we need that in our locker room right now. And I've harped on this before on this show. Peyton Manning, DeMarcus Ware, Kayvon Webster. I'm trying to think. Bruton was another one. These are all guys. Right. TJ Ward. Talib now is gone. There's just a lot of voices from that Super Bowl team that are gone. And I think that is such an underrated part about that team was they just had voices that had this united cry of we are here together. We're going to keep fighting together. Even though the offense is struggling and the defense is having to carry us, we're united. You didn't hear the complaints about how bad the offense was when Peyton Manning was there. I mean, who would dare to insult Peyton Manning and, hey, man, you're struggling. This is bad. Nobody would say that to Peyton Manning. But as soon as he was out of the building and it's Trevor Siemian, oh, man, come on, Trevor. This is terrible. Offensive line, you guys are terrible. I remember there was a story of I can't remember who it was, but one of the offensive linemen stood up because coaches had asked if anybody would like to say anything. And Talib pretty much said, sit your bleep down.
It was Okung.
It was Okung. That's who it was. And, it was just one of those moments you're like, oh, man, this team's heading for trouble. And so getting guys like this, adding a Case Keenum, who's a veteran to the offensive locker room as well. Valdir, he's a veteran, another guy. You just got some better voices in the locker room, especially with this draft class, and especially starting with Bradley Chubb. That I think is really going to set the tone for other defensive players. And especially, I honestly expect a pretty good year from Shane Ray, just because this is putting him on notice. Like, hey, you got to go out there and have a career season if you want to keep playing. There's no more, hey, I'm a first-round pick, I'm going to get all these opportunities. It's, hey, we've moved on. It's same with Paxton Lynch now of, hey, we've moved on to Case Keenum. Do something. Prove to us that you deserve to still be here. And, I guess that's my next question is, what does this mean for Shaq and Shane? Yeah,
I think both are probably on their last legs here in Denver. I don't see the Broncos allocating huge resources to re-sign these guys. All talk is that they're not going to exercise the fifth-year option on Shane Ray in case that he does get injured and make that 100% guaranteed. And it's an expensive option because the way the 5th year option works is it's like the transition tag. So it's the top 10 players at the position. Yeah, that average salary is what that player gets on that 5th year option. So that would make him pretty expensive, and they don't want to risk that. So yeah, it's definitely a concern for both of them. And I just don't see the Broncos ponying up that money when they're already going to be paying Chubb decent money. Even on a rookie salary, it's still decent money because it's a top 5 pick. Von Miller, the number 1 page edge rusher in football. And then you're going to pay another guy? I don't see it. So hopefully if they do keep him, those guys ball out this year, because then you can get a comp pick in 2020. We're talking way down the line, but 2020. Or even trade a guy, this before the season starts to get some assets now, because I know it's good to have great depth at edge rusher, and you want as many guys as you can there. But at the same time, you have a guy like Shaq Barrett or Shane Ray, and they're only playing 15 to 20% of the snaps. Yeah, that's good to have if you're on a championship team. I'm not sure this Broncos team is a championship team next year, so we'll see. But I don't think either of them are going to be long-term here for the Broncos, unless one of them is willing to take a hometown discount to stay in Denver on not a long-term deal, but more like a 2 or 3 year deal. And I just don't see either of those guys doing that, nor do I think they should. This is Shaq Barrett's chance to get paid, and this is Shane Ray's chance to get paid even more than he was than that first-round pick salary. So I think probably Bradley Chubb and Von Miller, those are your primary guys going forward, and we could see some other guys come in and play that that depth rusher role going forward, but I just don't see the Broncos paying Ray and Barrett.
Right. No, I agree with you. And I agree. They are a pretty good trade bait right now, especially maybe mid-season where you have a couple injuries and you have those teams that are like, oh, if we just had that pass rusher, maybe we could get over the hump. And I especially see with Shaq, I think is the guy that I really see getting that kind of opportunity. He just has that all-around game that you really like. But I've said from the beginning, I think Shaq is a better depth guy than a starter guy. And Shane he hasn't proven anything so far. He had that 8-sack season where he showed a little bit of promise, but it was still inconsistent. He had 3 or 4 sacks in one game?
Yeah, I think so.
Most of his production came, I think it was the Bengals game, if I remember right, where he just dominated and you're like, oh my gosh, he's finally emerging. This is the guy that at one point was viewed as a top 10 pick until he had his pullover of getting found, or where they found marijuana in his car. But he just hasn't quite been that player. So again, it's time to move on. It's time to move forward. And they got 2 great guys to move forward with. But I guess the other big question with anytime you have a top 5 pick, this is what's going to happen. And especially, we heard it with Josh Rosen's interview of there are 9 teams. It's actually 8 teams because the Browns had 2 picks. But there are 8 teams ahead of me that are going to really regret not taking me. And so I'm looking at Chubb, and I'm looking at the guys that were taken after him, guys that were tied to the Broncos. Of course, you have Quentin Nelson, you have Raquan Smith, Josh Rosen, and Josh Allen. How do you feel about that pick when you're looking at those guys and what they passed up on?
Well, like I said, if I was in charge, I'd probably pull the trigger on Josh Rosen because he was my number 1 quarterback on the board, and I would like to have that stability at that position going forward. But if the Broncos weren't going to trade up and they weren't going to get Mayfield/Darnold/Rosen, Bradley Chubb was the next best thing. So getting him, I have 0 complaints, and it makes sense. It's the perfect epitome because I think next year if you draft a guy like Rosen, that doesn't make the Broncos in 2018 better. Because you still paid Case Keenum, not the best allocation of the salary cap. And if you're drafting a guy like Nelson, yeah, that makes the Broncos better next year. But does it really make the team better 2020, 2021? Having that guard set is nice, but you're talking about a top 5 pick. I can't think of a single guard in the entire NFL that has the franchise-changing capability that you want from that top 5 pick. I'm talking about guys that have already been in the league for a while. As much as I love Brandon Scherf, top 5 pick, I don't know. You want a franchise changer there. But with an edge rusher like Bradley Chubb, especially playing with the best edge rusher in football in Von Miller, making both of them that much better, I have no complaints. Like I said, if I was in charge, though, I'd probably go with Rosen, but it's great because it's win now and it's win from now on, and that's something that Elway has preached from the beginning.
Right, yeah. If you can't get a quarterback, pass rusher is your next best option. We saw that 2015 season, it wasn't the quarterback play that won that Super Bowl. I would love to have great quarterback play. I mean, that's the number one thing you're looking for all the time in the NFL. If you can get it, you take it.
And coaching.
Right, and good coaching. That's very important too. It could be a very underrated thing of what this next season could mean. But the next thing after that, if you can have a great pass rush to get after that quarterback, because we saw it. The Broncos took down Ben Roethlisberger, Tom Brady, and Cam Newton. 3 of the top quarterbacks that season, in big part because they just had a great pass rush that made life hell for them. I mean, there's no way getting around that. I mean, Tom Brady, how many times did he get hit? 20, 25 times? Something like that. Most times in his career in that AFC Championship game. That might be one of my favorite games just because you got to see Tom Brady pretty much destroyed. That was so much fun to watch. But beyond that, yeah, it's a great thing to have. And like you said earlier, it can be an identity of your team. And this is a great identity to have with Von Miller and Bradley Chubb. And it just makes teams have to play you differently. And especially since both of them are great against the run, it's not like you can sit here and say, well, we're going to neutralize the pass game by just running it at them. But they're both great against the run. So what you going to do next? There's nothing. It's tough against these guys. So great pick for the Broncos. But I know we could talk about this all day. One final question before we move on to our next one. How would Chubb rank, in your opinion, against the edge rushers from the past couple of drafts? You're talking about Myles Garrett, Derek Barnett, Joey Bosa. How would you rank him against some of those type of guys?
I do not think that he would rank up there with Bosa. He would be just under Bosa. I think Bosa, the main difference there is that Bosa had elite change of direction ability and agility. His 3-cone for his size was, otherworldly, and I don't think he has the same athletic profile as the freaks that were Myles Garrett and Jadeveon Clowney. But that's okay. I mean, he's the 5th overall pick, not the 3rd overall pick, and that puts him, he'd probably be under them, but he's definitely a tier above guys like, Derek Barnett, or who are some other recent edge rushers?
Solomon Thomas?
Yeah, I think he's actually a more refined Solomon Thomas. Solomon Thomas went 3 overall, and I thought Solomon Thomas was more of an inside-outside guy, where Chubb, I think, is going to be more of a true edge. I would have him over a guy like Leonard Floyd, who went early a few seasons ago to the Bears. Dante Fowler to the Jags. He's definitely over that, and yep. Fowler was the 3rd overall pick. And then some other guys, I think he's a different player than Vic Beasley. Vic Beasley is more of that classic speed rusher, that kind of the Von Miller, Shane Ray type. But Chubb's more of that power edge, and that's fine. He's athletic enough to where he can still play that 3-4 edge. He reminds me a lot of Everson Griffin, who was not a super high pick for the Vikings, but has been shown to play 2-point stance, 3-point stance, and is very effective off the edge for them. So I like Chubb a lot, and I wouldn't be surprised at all if, he's a slightly lesser version of Khalil Mack, those very powerful hands. He's going to add a little bit more dip to him. He's going to have to add a little bit more flexibility, but that power edge that can play 3-4, 4-3, kind of like a Bosa or a Khalil Mack. And I think that given his work ethic, and again, playing with a guy like Von Miller opposite him, sky's the limit. He could end up being a top 5-10 edge rusher in the NFL by the time it's done. Another guy that kind of that power edge rusher as well, Brandon Graham. So there's some interesting guys there. And I'm really excited to see what Bradley Chubb can do for the Broncos, and hopefully for the next 10, 15 years.
Yeah. One of the names that was thrown out that really kind of caught my attention, it was by Ray Lewis was talking, and he said he watched all of Chubb's tape, and he said the guy that he reminded him of was Terrell Suggs.
Yeah.
He said, I got that same feeling the first time I saw Suggs as the first time I watched Chubb. The technician that they were, the strong hands, the ability just to set up pass rush opportunities, the ability to fight off blockers, just that fight to just want to win every single time. He said, I just felt like I was watching Terrell Suggs out there. And people kind of forget Terrell Suggs, he ran a 4.85 at the combine. So not really that speed guy, but he obviously was pretty darn effective in the NFL. So if the Broncos can get Terrell Suggs and Von Miller on the field, oh my goodness, quarterbacks are going to be crying every week that they have to play the Broncos.
Yeah. Hey, here's something that's crazy. I'm going to read you so you know that Bleacher Report does a ranking. It's called NFL 1000 after every single season where they rank the positions.
Yeah.
Here's what they have written for Everson Griffin, who was the number 5 overall edge rusher in football last season, according to their tape experts. This is what Justice Mosqueda said. In every one of the first 8 games of the season, Everson Griffin recorded a sack, setting his own personal sack mark in 2017. It's clear he's getting better with age. He's not the most athletic pass rusher while bending the edge, but he plays with great hand placement and has an amazing first step. The savvy edge defender also has some of the strongest hands in the entire league. So there you go. I think that's the comp. They're almost the exact same size.
Yeah, that sounds very familiar to a certain report that I've read on Bradley Chubb. So, yeah, I agree. He and Von Miller are not the same kind of pass rusher, not at all. And you're not going to expect that same kind of explosive ability. And I don't expect him ever to get to the level of Von Miller. I mean, Von Miller is the best pass rusher in the NFL right now. So
he has been for a bit.
Right.
Him and Watt. Like, Von Miller's on his way to the Hall of Fame.
Oh, easily. Yeah. I mean, he could. I think just a couple more seasons of great play, and I think he should be a lock to get in there.
Yeah.
But yeah, just to have this kind of player on the other side, because now they can mix and match, kind of like the Chargers do. Yeah. Where they got a weaker offensive lineman. Oh, stick Joey Bosa over there just to destroy the guy. For the Broncos, they can do that same thing. Oh, this guy can fight off speed rushers. Well, let's stick Bradley Chubb over there and just let him just power this guy back into the quarterback. So there's just so many more options the Broncos can do of mixing and matching and finding the great matchups for these guys. And just his ability to, you highlighted it, his ability to do stunts.
Oh my gosh. Oh, how did we not even talk about that? His stunts are so good.
We got to get into this just for a second here, because it's so important, because this guy, I mean, he is that explosive ability just to take that first step, and then all of a sudden, boom, he's going down the middle of the offensive line and right in the quarterback's face. It is otherworldly. It is beautiful. That's the best word I can. When I was watching, I'm like, oh, I can't wait to watch that.
Yeah, it's like probably watching a star explode. So much power and just awe.
I love it. So yeah, I mean, this is beyond quarterback. This was the only player I was going to be happy with at 5. And I'm so glad he fell into our lap. I read about his draft day. They did a recording of everything that happened with him. And his agent was talking about how all these teams kept calling him going, hey, are the Browns taking him at 4? Are the Browns taking him at 4? And then obviously they took Ward. And then he said, I got all these calls of people going, are the Broncos taking him? And his whole family was just celebrating because they were so happy that he got to the Broncos. And so I think they're happy. Bronco fans should be very, very happy. This is going to be a fun duo for the next quite a few years here.
Yep. And Von Miller, he wanted to get that 30-sack season. Well, it's as possible as it's ever been with a guy like Chubb. Now the Broncos just need to find somebody to replace Malik Jackson on the inside. So maybe next year, we can talk about
maybe we'll get into that. Yeah, we'll maybe get into that a little bit.
Not today, but yeah. And now we still have another player to get to, but first we want to say thank you to our great sponsor, Audible. Get a free audiobook download and a 30-day free trial at www.audibletrial.com/huddleup. Over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. Again, that's www.audibletrial.com/huddleup.
All right, well, let's move on and talk about our round 2 selection. Pick number 40, Courtland Sutton, wide receiver from Southern Methodist. And if you Bronco fans remember, I've talked about him a few times on here, and I have said I've not been a very big fan of his. Now, when I say that, a big part of it was I was not a big fan of taking him in the first round. I talked about that with Williams from last year, where I didn't mind the player. I just didn't like him in the first round. I didn't think he should have gone as high as he did, because I like those guys that can get separation. I like those guys that are great route runners. And Courtland Sutton is not always one of those type of guys. Now, I've gone back and I've watched him a lot more now that he is a Denver Bronco. And there's a lot of things I like and a lot of things that I have questions about with him. So I'm just going to kind of go into a little bit of scouting on this guy, because, I mean, wide receiver is my position. So bear with me. I get a little detailed here. But Courtland Sutton, he had one of the best 3-cone drills for a guy his size that I've ever seen. So I know he has that explosive ability. I know he has that ability to separate. He has decent long speed. Not great, but decent long speed. So he can get open. This guy has great leaping ability, great body control, great hands. He can sometimes have those concentration drops where he's trying to do a little too much because he wants to do things in the open field. But there's so much about his game to really like. Now, this is where, for me, things break down with him and why I struggle with him being this high of a pick. I don't know how much of an impact he's going to make year one. This is something that we're going to talk about. How do you think he's going to do year one compared to year 4 of his contract with the Broncos? Year one, this is what I noticed. With Southern Methodist, they asked him to run pretty much, I would say 4 routes maybe. The slant play, the go, the comeback, and the screen pass. Screen pass doesn't really take a whole lot of technique. I mean, it's take a step forward, step back. There's little things you're trying to do to sell that, but those are the main things that he ran. And the comeback, he wasn't great at it because he'd flatten out his route. And the comeback is where he's running up the field, and then he kind of comes back towards the sideline. Curl routes where they curl inside, comebacks where they actually run towards the sideline. And he just kind of stands there. He doesn't really do an actual comeback. And that's something that really irritates me with wide receivers because you're making it easier for that defensive back to make a play. He has a big body, so he's able to kind of box a guy out a little bit. But I just think he could actually have some opportunities for big plays if he came back just a little bit further. And then he's got to work on his footwork. I mean, I saw him take like 5 steps to make a turn, in big part because his feet just got too wide. So, again, there's some problems there. Go route, he's good at that. No problem. Slant, he does okay. Sometimes he rounds off his route. But, again, that's one of the big things with him is he's not complete. Kind of like when DT came into the league for the Broncos. He was not going to be this huge impact player year one because he was so raw as a route runner. Georgia Tech pretty much told him, you just run down the field as fast as you can and we'll throw it up to you. Wouldn't you say that was pretty much what they did with him?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, he was a fly route. He ran 9s. So it was the triple option or, heavy run game. And DT was supposed to take the top off the defense. And if he got by, there was a chance they're going to chuck it up to him. But nothing at all advanced. I mean, it was pretty much 5th grader playing Madden level stuff.
Pretty much, yes, exactly. So this is where I have some problems because I really love the Cody Latimer pick. In big part because I saw the tools that he had and said, if he can develop, he can become something great. Kind of like DT. He had all the tools to be a great wide receiver. But it took a quarterback like Peyton Manning coming in and saying, hey, if you're going to run this slant pattern, you're going to run it right. When I tell you cut at 5 yards and run at this kind of degree angle, that's what I want. And we're going to run this until you get it right. And so pretty much Manning demanded him to become a great route runner. And it really took his game to that next level. He was already an athlete. He was already a guy that could take a screen pass 80 yards or a quick slant, and he could take it 80 yards. That was no problem for him. He was just that great of an athlete. And I feel that same way with Courtland Sutton. He's not quite that kind of athlete as DT coming out, but he's a guy he's just athletically gifted. He can go make a lot of great plays. I just don't know what he's going to be year one, and I don't know what he's going to do to work his tail off to become great. Because Cody Latimer, we heard stories of when times with Peyton Manning after he was drafted, where Peyton Manning in the plane ride through the game would want to talk with his wide receivers and say, hey, I want to make sure that we're really thinking about this. Cody Latimer would put on his headphones. I mean, how big of cojones do you have to do that in front of Peyton Manning?
I wouldn't call it cojones.
Okay, well, maybe not that. I mean, just disrespect. I mean, that's just I can't believe somebody would do that to Peyton Manning. This is a guy that's trying to help you to become a great player. And you're just like, I don't really care. I'm just going to do my own thing. And we saw he just never got on the field because Peyton Manning never trusted him. So Courtland Sutton, is he different? Is he the type of guy that's going to go out there and work his tail off? Everything I've read off the field makes me think there is a very good chance that he could be. One of the things that really caught my eye was they called his college basketball coach, which this is kind of crazy, Coach Larry Brown. And I'm from Kansas, so we know Larry Brown very well from his days with KU. And he coached some of the greats of KU's time, led them to championships. He's a very beloved person here in Kansas. But anyway, he went to SMU to coach, and he got talked into it by the SMU football coach. And he had one day the coach came up to him and pretty much said, I bet you that I could take my 5 best football players against your 5 best basketball players and play them in a game, and our football players would beat your basketball players. And so they had kind of like this little scrimmage, and Courtland Sutton was a star to the point that Larry Brown wanted him on the basketball team. And so they had some people call up Larry Brown and ask him about this guy. And he said, you know what, I'll talk all day about Courtland Sutton. He's a special, special guy. His leadership, his personality, just thrilled for him to go to the Broncos. He said, I kept reading, he's 6'3". I don't think he's 6'3". For us on the basketball court, he played bigger than that. We used him under the basket. I honestly thought if he would have come to us his freshman year and stayed with us, because he only played that freshman year, he would have been a regular player for us. He made our practices better every day, and he's just an unbelievable kid. And then he talked about that there was a ex-SMU player, Ben Moore, who's now playing for the Pacers, and he said Courtland held his own every day against that guy. He said he just became family. He has that type of personality you want to work with. It's contagious. And so when I hear those things from even other coaches and stories I've read of just the work that he put in, because he actually came into college as a defensive back. And then they just loved him so much at wide receiver. They're just like, we got to move you to the offensive side of the ball. So I don't question as much with him as I did Cody Latimer that this guy's going to put in the time to become something great, as he was a team captain there at SMU. And I saw him improve every year as a route runner. His final year, I saw him doing some things that I wouldn't have seen him doing 2 years before that. Little things of his footwork and just improving some of his steps to get himself open a little bit more. So the work is there. I think the guy is going to work his tail off. It's just a matter of, do we see it year one? So that's my big question to you to start off with here. Do you think year one he's going to make a big impact for the Broncos?
I think year one you're going to see him more sparingly. I'm honestly thinking that Deshaun Hamilton, due to his route running savviness, which I'm sure next week when we get to that, you're going to be excited to talk about him because he seems more like your type. But Sutton, I think this year, probably not seeing him as much, except in the red zone where his wingspan and his competitiveness attacking the football in the air and his ability to play the football in the air, which is outstanding, is going to be very much appreciated by Case Keenum and the Broncos, which they've lacked a guy opposite of DT who can play the ball in the air. Cody Latimer, I think that he never really showed that competitive toughness in the air. I think I saw it somewhat at Indiana, but not to the level that I see it with Sutton. Sutton goes up and he gets it. His hands aren't always the best. I did notice that sometimes, if he looks to create yards after catch and he'll turn his head upfield to take his eyes off the ball and he'll drop it, but he has pretty strong hands, soft hands. So I'm excited about that. And for a guy his size, you touched on it. His 3-cone at a 6.57, I mean, that's pretty rare. He was up there for the 3-cone score. It was the 96th percentile of all wide receivers ever recorded. And when you put into context that he's a 6'4", 220-pound wide receiver, that's insane.
That's so special.
That is special. It's different. I mean, you don't see that. So when they first made the pick of Sutton, I was a little bit confused because I didn't really want to go wide receiver early, but there was talk that Sutton was a top 20 player on the Broncos board, even higher. Some people I've heard from that they even had him higher than 20th overall, and they're excited about him. But he's going to have to work in improving his ability to separate via routes because that's the name of the game in today's NFL. I mean, you see plenty of raw athletic pass rushers come in and not pass rushers, pass catchers come in, but if they're not getting separation from routes, they either have a great quarterback that's fitting it in there, or they're not being great. They're not being productive. So interesting guy. I think he's similar to Alshon Jeffrey, but I think he's got a little bit more explosiveness in the air and in his ability to change direction. And I don't know how much you looked at the NDT scouting guide at Kyle Krabs that I provided for you there, but did you see who his NFL comparison was for Courtland Sutton?
I'm trying to remember who he had.
Terrell Owens.
Huh.
Terrell Owens. I'm not sure about that. I mean, Terrell Owens, if it wasn't for him being a jerk, would probably be a Hall of Fame wide receiver. So, I don't know about that, but very interesting player. I think I'm very excited to see how he develops, and he seems like a natural progression plan going from Demaryius Thomas to a new wide receiver after this season. So I love Demaryius Thomas, but Broncos can get, I think it's $14 million in cap relief next year if they move on from him. He has a $17 million cap hit, can save $14 million. So I think Sutton's probably your future X receiver, and that could be as soon as next season.
I guess this is one reason that I give this, after going back and watching this guy a little bit more, that I like this pick a little bit more than I did before, is the fact that he actually can become a number one wide receiver.
Yeah.
I never really saw that with some of the other guys. DJ Moore, I saw more as that number two. Calvin Ridley, his ceiling was a number two kind of wide receiver. Courtland Sutton is one of the few that I sit there and say, if he actually becomes a good route runner, he could be a true number one in this league. He could become that top 12 kind of wide receiver where you're looking at 1,200 yards, 12 touchdowns in a season kind of thing. Kind of like what you're getting out of DT before all the quarterback play was just downright terrible. So again, I like that aspect, but I just don't know year one how much this is really going to pay off. And I could see a lot of Bronco fans getting very impatient going, oh my gosh, here we go, Cody Latimer all again. But I guess the only way I see him making a huge impact is if Emmanuel Sanders is willing to go play the slot some. Because Courtland Sutton is just he's not a slot guy. That's not his game. That's not where he's going to be his strongest. And so maybe when they get to those three wide receiver packs, can they convince Emmanuel Sanders to go into the slot? Because that was one thing he really did not want to do. He doesn't like that position. It really, I can't blame him. The slot position is one of the most dangerous positions in football.
Ask Wes Welker.
Yes. I mean, all those guys, they have those kind of injuries. Edelman, how many times has he been done for the season because he can't survive a season? Wes Welker, I mean, Stokely is one of the, Stokely is one of the few that really kind of held up for the most part. But even there, he still was struggling with injuries at different times. So I can understand why he doesn't want to go there. But it might be the best thing for the Broncos to get the most talent on the field. That's why I might be a little bit higher on our other wide receiver pick that we're going to talk about next week, is I could see a lot more day one impact because he can play the slot. I think he'd be perfect for the slot position. But I guess we'll just have to see how they use him and how he's willing to develop. Because like I said, that's going to be his biggest thing. He has all the tools in the world to be great. Maybe not Terrell Owens great.
God,
but
that's crazy.
I know that's a top 5 receiver of all time, in my opinion, or up there, pretty close to that at least. But again, the ceiling is very, very high with this guy. So I can understand why the Broncos loved him. But I guess, what does this mean then for the other wide receivers that the Broncos have taken, like McKenzie, like Henderson last year? What happens to them? Are the Broncos pretty much admitting they made a mistake?
I think it's very possible that McKenzie's going to be gone. I can't see McKenzie and Jordan Taylor making the roster, so whichever one can offer more special teams is probably the guy that sticks around, and the other one's going to be let go. So we'll see. Yeah, I really like Sutton. Another thing I didn't really touch on with him, sorry to take it back, but I think he's got some massive potential also after the catch. His ability to cut and his aggressiveness with the ball in his hands is obvious on tape, so that's something that excites me. And while I wish there are times when he flashes really strong as a pass or a run blocker, I wish he'd just be a little bit more consistent with that. And, he's not Cody Latimer taking a guy's head off, but the potential is giant. I do think this puts a lot of guys on notice, though, on the Broncos' current roster. I think this probably is the last year for Emmanuel Sanders and Demaryius Thomas. I mean, I really doubt both those guys are here next year. One of them might still be around, but both of them, I don't see it. Not with these picks. So it helps the Broncos. This is more of a future pick than it is a immediate impact pick, but I'm okay with it because look what the wide receivers on the open market got paid this year. It was insane. Wide receivers a position, especially because they're just playing more and more 3 wide receiver sets where you need those guys on the outside that can win those one-on-one matchups. Because there's so much volatility at the position, especially for early draft picks,
Right. Well, you look at the guys last year, not a single first-round pick wide receiver did anything of real value.
Yeah. And then you have Juju Smith-Schuster, who was great.
Right, exactly. So it's a hard position to really judge because there is such a huge jump. Like I said, you're going from running maybe 4 main routes in college to all of a sudden the entire route tree plus variations of those kind of routes plus option routes that you have to look at how to read a defense and understand what the quarterback's looking at so you can understand which route he wants you to run. I mean, it gets very, very complicated very quickly. And it gets these guys with their head spin. We saw it with Henderson last year. There was a lot of times he really struggled. I saw it at the Senior Bowl with guys that were being asked to do things that they'd never done before. And I especially remember with Lazard. And I remember bragging on here how great his hands were, how they were some of the best hands I've ever seen. And Eric Trickle agreed with me on that. And you were sitting there going, oh my gosh, I need to go back and watch this guy a little bit more because I don't remember seeing that. And then I got to the Senior Bowl and he was just having to think through every step. And then when the ball was coming at him, catching was the last thing on his mind kind of thing. So it takes a while to get it all together. And especially in today's NFL and what they all ask of their wide receivers. But you talked about one thing I wanted to hit at here just a little bit. You said his open field ability. He kind of reminds me of Brandon Marshall. Wide receiver Brandon Marshall.
Yeah.
Because I remember him in the open field. He'd make some guys look silly sometimes. And there's times I saw Sutton just make people look silly. Both using his strength, because there's times he lowered his shoulder or he just stiff-armed guys to the ground, and using his little bit of wiggle that he has. So that was a guy that always kept coming to my mind when watching him. And because Brandon Marshall would have the same thing with some concentration drops where he tried to do a little too much sometimes, but he'd also make some great catches. He'd have great body control that just really shocked me about his ability to make some catches. So just getting it back to an old Bronco, and he doesn't have the off the field issues, thankfully. He doesn't have oh my goodness, the Brandon Marshall, man, that character. But no, I like this pick more today than I did 2 weeks ago, or if this pick was 2 weeks ago. Like I said, just going back and watching him and just hoping for some development. The more you learn about the guy's background, the more you get excited about him. I expect big things from him in his sophomore year, maybe not his rookie year.
Yeah, I agree. But it's still red zone weapon, very needed. Case Keenum's a guy who threw a lot of contested catches for his wide receivers last year. A lot of his yards were after the catch as well. So 2 things that Sutton excels at. He's just going to need to continue to work on a route running, but I think DT can help him there, and hopefully Emmanuel Sanders as well. Both SMU Mustangs. So exciting pick, that's for sure. And I was a little bit, surprised about it at first, but the more I watched Sutton, the more I heard about him, especially the work ethic. Again, another leader, another captain. I was more and more happy about the pick, and I'd give it not as high as the Chubb pick, but I'd give it an A-.
Yeah, I gave it a B+. Just
You're higher than I am.
Yeah, I know. I really like the player. I really do. And like I said, I do expect big things from him. I just wish we got a little bit more year one impact than I think we're probably going to get. And I hate us taking all these second round picks that are more developmental kind of guys. I just wish we'd take some more second round picks that were day one starters for us. I know you can't actually predict that they're going to be that kind of thing, but that you can see some guys need more work than others. And so just some of that brings his grade down more than anything else. Like I said, long term, this might end up being the best pick of the draft for the Broncos. He really does have that number one wide receiver ability.
Yeah. But
short term, I just don't see much of a great impact. Maybe I could see him having like 5-6 touchdowns this upcoming year. Because like you said, I think he could be a huge red zone threat for the Broncos. And I'm sure they'll find some ways to get him involved in the offense, but I wish we had a little bit more finished product.
I totally agree. Well, that's actually going to wrap up this week's episode of Building the Broncos. Carl and I wanted to get to the round 3 players as well of Royce Freeman and Isaac Yiadom, but unfortunately, we have so much to say about Courtland Sutton and Bradley Chubb that we're just not going to be able to get to those guys. So maybe we're going to get you guys that next week or maybe sooner. I don't know. Carl, well, I'll reach out to you. Maybe we'll have to do something this weekend to get these guys out there while we're still hot on the trail of the NFL draft. You might be busy. I'm not sure, but we'll see what we can do for your listeners.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah. You can find Carl on Twitter at Carl Dumler MHH and myself at Nick Kendall MHH. Also, make sure you head over to Mile High Huddle, an affiliate of 247 Sports and CBS Sports Digital, to find ours and our co-writers' articles, not just related to the draft, but all things that pertain to your Denver Broncos. I just recently released a piece on Bradley Chubb and why his pick, again, talked about it in this podcast, but why it's a win now and win from now on piece. Also, the Bradley Chubb roundtable report card piece came out of all the Mile High Huddle reporters and what they thought of Bradley Chubb. And believe it or not, Mr. Chad Jensen, the host of the Huddle Up podcast, was Mr. Negative, gave him an A-. So I thought that would be me. He said the only reason he gave Chubb an A- is because we didn't get Josh Rosen. So I guess maybe I rubbed off on Chad a little bit there. A little too much. Carl, do you got anything coming out here pretty soon?
Yeah, I'm in the middle of working on a piece about the 2 wide receivers the Broncos took and just going a little bit more in depth of what to expect from them, especially year one. And like we kind of talked about in this podcast, you might be a little shocked of who I have making the greater day one impact for the Broncos.
Well, not going to be shocked anymore. Spoiler alert.
I know. Sorry, spoiled it.
Make sure you head over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star rating and comment. Your support can help us continue to bring you our Denver Bronco deep dives. We aren't just here to bring you the news, but in-depth analysis each and every week from team building, game planning, and 365 days of covering the Denver Broncos. You can follow the Huddle Up podcast by subscribing to us on iTunes and for Android users Stitcher, as well as check us out on YouTube. You can follow us on Twitter at Mile High Huddle and at Huddle Up Pod. Again, please be sure to subscribe and rate us and reach out to us as we love interacting and talking football with you fellow Bronco fans. For Carl Dumler, I'm Nick Kendall, wrapping up another episode of Building the Broncos. We hope you enjoyed it, and we will see you next week. Go Broncos, and go draft.
Mile High Huddle.